be welcoming to the stage Senior Manager Responsible AI at LinkedIn, here to talk about a closer look at fairness in job ecosystem. Please welcome Sakshi Jain.
Hello.
Hi,
Thank you,
so
Priya.
excited to have you here. I'm looking forward to this topic. I think it's something that many of us are, thinking about already. So take it away.
I'm excited to share too. I'll just quickly figure out sharing. Okay. Is everyone able to see the screen? Priya, could you confirm?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I am very excited to be talking about fairness in jobs ecosystem, and especially at LinkedIn. I lead this team which works on equity and explainable AI, so it's been my pleasure to connect my passion to my skills here. So I hope like from this talk you get a better sense of how we've been thinking about fairness, like how we've been operationalizing it and giving it more structure in the system. To begin with, just why do we even care about this problem? Um, and I believe most of you would already know the motivation, but just to reiterate, AI and technology plays a really critical role in so many important places in our life. And this goes beyond jobs, like jobs and employment is one critical place where we play a role, but also in just like getting loans, getting credit, in so many things that significantly changed the trajectory of our life. And so it has become even more important than before to start thinking about how responsibly have we been operating the system that changes and affects so many people. There's a nice TV show called Social Dilemma, which can provide some more motivation around this. So, of all the responsible AI principles, the one which I would be talking more about is fairness. But responsible AI does not is not restricted to it. And just to give a context, it includes things like transparency, privacy, security, even accessibility. And all of this falls under this bigger picture of responsible AI. And I'll be going deeper into fairness. So, talking about fairness, which is a very interesting subject, we look into how do we define fairness? What does fairness even mean? And while I'm sure, like everyone even listening has some notion of fairness, like some notion of what they consider fair, strangely, so it's been such a difficult subject to quantify, and it's because the notion of fairness is actually quite different for different folks. There's a study which showcased that even monkeys, for example, have a notion of fairness, but um, when it does come down for us to quantify it in different ways, it becomes extremely complex. And I'm hoping that through this talk, I am able to motivate the nuances and the challenges in this space more. This is what I was just saying. Like there is historically there hasn't been so much talk about fairness, and I think recently, post 2017, there has been just a blast of work in the space. So I'm super excited, and if this is something you haven't checked out and you're curious to learn more, I would definitely suggest dabbing a little bit into this. So the way I'm going to structure this talk is to just give a high level overview of how we think about fairness at LinkedIn, and like just procedurally how we think about different steps that are important, because we are playing this game of like how do we build solutions for fairness which is scalable across a company as wide as LinkedIn and with AI systems as wide as ours, and how do we bring in the appreciation for nuances in individual product, and how do we balance these two. So to that end, I'll first talk about measurement and go deeper into that. Then I'll touch upon how we can mitigate if we find something, and what have we doing for a continuous monitoring of these biases. So to motivate our biases, I want to take a minute to like spend some time here as to what the different societal biases are and how they have made it into our systems. And just to note, like we're mainly talking about historically and systemically marginalized groups. These include based on gender, based on race, potentially based on age, disability, etc. I will use gender as an example and binary gender specifically as an example throughout the talk, but it doesn't, I don't mean to exclude non-binary, and it is just being used as an example. So when I ask like, oh, why do you think systems are biased? I think the most common answer and understanding is, okay, hey, humans are biased, and that's getting into the system. And of course, since the data is bad, garbage in, garbage out, our models are bad. But I think there is more to it, and here are some of the different ways in which it plays a role. So let's start with algorithms, which is the more intuitive sense. So in algorithms, you can have biases because you do not have a good representation of a particular group. Let's say females from a particular geography in your system, and you just there isn't enough rich data for a model to learn. Or when your modelers are actually building models and iterating, they tend to look at these global performance and not performance on more granular distributions. And it is very much possible that you built a model that looks great and it is improving your AUC, and you launch it, everything looks great. But you know what, like when you look at it from how it's impacting, let's say, men versus women, it is significantly impacting women negatively and men positively. It's just that we never broke it down this way to look at it. There are definitely biases in human labels, and there's also bias in the training data from the point of view of served examples. Like for example, as LinkedIn, we mainly know like data that has already been served on our platform, and there could be significant bias there. But this is not the end of it, and this is what like, and I want to complement it with just what other things also play a role which may not be as obvious. So product design plays a role, and here like I have a very like a good example I love about LinkedIn. One example is when especially females, like they were taking a break from their career after having a child. They would put a career break, but then they would associate their career history with a company called self-employed. And because we did not have a feature that could actually enable you to say that I'm taking a break for taking care of home. And what that resulted it like was in downstream applications, it was this self-employed company, which did not make sense, and it impacted the recommendations going forward. And it was this is not so much of a data problem as it is a product design problem. So that's when LinkedIn launched a feature to enable like men, women, families to have a career break, where they're looking after their family. There are also behavioral differences, and this is really important because we often there is a notion of 50-50. Should we have the outcomes to be 50-50? And one thing to keep in mind is people from different communities, they do not want the same things. What we are going for is everyone should have an equal opportunity to get what they are striving for, but not necessarily in the a 50-50 outcome for each. So that's another, and the behaviors of different segments actually tend to be very different, and that is something that we have to take into account when looking at our systems and looking at differences in the different populations when thinking about mitigation. So what does fairness mean to you? And there are two concepts I generally hear when I ask people, and I want to just motivate where like why even the basic of the concepts are potentially in conflict with each other. So one thing that's known to anyone who's close to fairness community is there are many definitions of fairness, and not all of them are in conjunction or in alignment with each other. And here is just an example of two. So one notion is, hey, I don't want discrimination. If the two groups, if folks from two groups are equally qualified, I expect that they get equal. There is no discrimination against one group, and that they get equal opportunity. This is like great. However, someone may come in and say, you know what, but Black community has not even had the opportunity to be qualified, so it's not really fair that you are basing yourself on qualification. Like, what about improving the representation of the Black community? And as you can see, like it is a very fair question, but like the representation and non-discrimination can itself go against each other. If you're trying to uplift one community so that they start to so that there we are solving the startup problem, it may need some special treatment of one group, and this is where the problems of fairness definitions start. So to that end, I'll go over what we have been doing, how we have been thinking about this in our heads, and I'll just use one example to ground us. So LinkedIn has this product called People You May Know, which is if you go to your network, you can LinkedIn will recommend to you people you may know, you may want to get connected with, and you go through these tiles and you can see, you can send them an invite, you can receive invite, you can send them an invite, and the person who's receiving the invite can choose to accept, reject, and then you can have a conversation going forward. So here, this is an example of a platform where we think about fairness quite hard, and we are talking about fairness for the members who are being recommended for connections, as well as the members who are looking at these like looking at these recommendations and clicking on them. So here there is fairness to be asked about the gender or the race of who is being recommended, as well as the person who is looking at these recommendations. So we look at a suite of metrics in order to deal with the complexity of the problem. And what I'll do is I'll try to motivate and try to give an example of two of the metrics that we look at in conjunction when evaluating a system. So one is called algorithmic fairness, or it is commonly also called calibration bias or predictive rate parity. So in here, we are trying to quantify this principle of equal opportunity for equally qualified members. So how do we do that? We take apart these words of opportunity and qualified and see if we can find a good approximation for them. When we think about opportunity, so opportunity is real estate on the platform, right? Like if, let's say, my profile gets recommended to someone, it's an opportunity given to me to connect with this person. So opportunities are approximated by where you are ranking on the system, and which is determined by the model scores. So we map opportunity to model scores to quantify. Now when you think about qualification, which is more nuanced, it's very difficult to know the ground truth of how qualified was I to be recommended to this person X. And since there is no ground truth, we have to, in order to make some progress, we have to approximate it with something. And we say that, okay, to begin with, let's approximate it by whether the person to whom my profile was shown clicked on my profile or not. And of course, this is not taking into account human bias, because like if that person is biased and they potentially only click on, let's say, female profiles, it's not great. But what this formulation does is it helps to separate issues in the labeling from issues in the core algorithmic part. What checking for model scores mapping to outcomes would give us is, given or assuming that the data is correct, do your model scores really correspond to the outcomes, or is it true that females who are actually getting similar number of connection requests as males are actually getting lower scores? And now it's easier to think about this from the point of view of calibration, that are the two groups calibrated correctly against each other. So that was a mouthful, and this is one of the metric which is often called predictive rate parity that we look at. And here is another one. So we call it product representation funnel. And so what here we do is we keep our model scores aside and we say, okay, let me understand how the distribution of different demographics changes through a product. And this is irrespective of our model scores. So what in the example of PYMK that we just spoke about, the layers of different product of the product funnel would include the what was the distribution of male and females in the candidate generation layer, which is like the candidates that the model was considering to be shown. Now, of them, how many were actually shown to people, and what was the distribution there? Of them, how many actually did get an invitation on their end, and did the distribution shift there? And of them, how many invitations were accepted, and what was the distribution there? And as you can imagine, if you just look at how the breakdown between males and females, as an example in this case, moves through the funnel, it can be quite different. And in this case, we do observe that females tend to accept fewer invites than males for the game, for normalized for the invitations received. Now, like having observed this, is this a bias problem or is it not? And that's a which is an interesting question to answer, because it is possible that like females are just more selective in who they accept invites from, or it is also possible that the model probably just gave really bad recommendations to females as they give to males. So while this gives us an overall picture of where we stand today, it does not necessarily, a gap here does not necessarily imply bias or discrimination, but it allows us to start digging further into why is this happening? Could it be algorithms? Could it be behavior? Could it be something else? So I'll shift gears to mitigation, but just to summarize for measurement, measuring for fairness really comes down to what principles you stand behind. And often you have to take into account multiple metrics to evaluate a product and take into account the nuances of that product when thinking about measurement. But once we do that, there are different ways in which you can think about mitigation, and I'll just touch upon a sliver of that. Here I talk about mitigation approaches focused just on the machine learning system. You can definitely try to do and build new product features like the one I mentioned earlier about having the capability to say you're taking care at home. So in this case, the way we divide the framework is there are many pre-processing, in-processing, and post-processing techniques. So what this means is you can, if you let's say see a gap between males and females in terms of any of the performance metrics, you have the capability to change things in the pre-processing layer, maybe by looking for the representation of different groups and seeing if you have enough rich data there. But something like Snorkel can be extremely helpful. And you can look at something in processing where you can change the optimization function, and you can potentially add a constraint on fairness in the optimization function itself. You can also look at things post-processing. And in post-processing, you may be wanting to fix things. You let the model scores be, and then you're observing gaps, and you can fix things post-facto. And which technique you use is a function of the how mature the stack is, what the data looks like, and many other factors. So you have to take into account the fairness metrics as well as the solutions available here to pick the right one for a particular product. And finally, after we do the mitigation, like how do we ensure that you did not just like audit a system, fix it, and that's it, you're forgetting about it? How do we ensure that we have a culture and a continuous monitoring system for all of AI, for example, at LinkedIn? And to that end, some other things that we have been doing and thinking about is what tools and processes can we build to enable our modelers and product to like for them to for it to be easy to think about fairness. So an example of two things that we do is every time a modeler trains a model on our platform, they automatically get a fairness report. So it's very easy for them to see it right there, how your new model or new iteration that you've trained performs. Similarly, we also have embedded fairness metrics in our A/B testing platform. So I've been starting to think about how to leverage it, how to use it, what does it mean when fairness metrics are not looking so good, etc. Yeah, and just an example of the question that we get to answer is across all experiments that is happening across LinkedIn, this empowers us to say, could this initiative, which is not necessarily an AI initiative, it could be anything, could this initiative actually be skewing the outcomes across gender lines, across race lines, across any of these protected attribute lines more? And if so, can we regroup as a team, and can we figure out what can be done to mitigate that? And just to bring it all together, I spoke about measurement, mitigation, and continuous monitoring, and these are some of the things I spoke about as concept. These are just the starting point. There are so many nuances and complexities in the space that still need to be uncovered. And I'm trying to motivate some of them here. And one I would call out is an example of group fairness versus intersectionalities. So until now, I've been using as an example, like, okay, what happens if you find females getting discriminated against, or what happens if you seeing very disparate experiences between females and males? But the question is, what about, for example, a Black female whose experience may be worse than the Black community or worse than the female community independently? And so, how do we evolve our system to start thinking about intersectionalities of these different protected groups? And think about like how can we better benefit them, and how can we better how can we improve the fairness mitigation for these subgroups? One other interesting problem here is often when you think about a group, you like if you just look at all the females or all the males, you may feel like on an aggregate things are going okay. But if you look deeper into one segment, it is possible that most of the benefit, for example, in the female population, may be concentrated to the top 10 percentile, and it may be much more spread out for males. And that is another thing that we need to be more careful about, is how distributed is the benefit to all the members within that group, and making sure that it's not super concentrated. I'd like to conclude mainly by saying fairness is a socio-political and technical problem. It involves introspecting what is it that we stand for. It involves bringing in policy and legal and comms and products. It truly takes a village to concretize our philosophy of fairness. And with that, I would like to stop and just conclude. Is I'm more than happy to reach out if you're interested in the space. We really need folks, especially on the industry side, to be talking and discussing the challenges more, because it's not an easy problem.
Awesome. That was a fascinating talk, Sakshi. Thank you so much for sharing some real life motivations from LinkedIn. Um, we do have some questions. The first question is from Roshni, and she says, fairness might not be absolute or qualitative. Do you think we can measure and report on all aspects of fairness quantitatively?
Um, So I agree. I think fairness is not all quantitative, and there are a lot of qualitative aspects to it. And I think the reason or the fascination to make it quantitative is so that we can make a change and measure progress, and that's mainly the motivation. There's like, if you see some gap, how do you know you're making progress? But having said that, I think there people are continuously doing qualitative studies as to what is the sense that you get when you look at LinkedIn, in order to supplement our quantitative understanding with qualitative. So I think we need to continuously do both. And one of the recent things which I heard in a panel on fairness was, um, it's unlike AUC metric, for example, image classification. It's unlike that, where, for example, every year there's a new model coming in and saying like, okay, we have improved it by 5% and 7%. We may actually just continuously need to change our goalpost and evolve even the definition of what we are measuring. So it just comes free with the problem, unfortunately.
Makes a lot of sense. I actually had a similar question in that how do you even know if the metrics that you're looking at are fair themselves, like the metric for fairness, are they fair themselves? But you answered it already, I guess, by saying that you take a balance between qualitative and quantitative measurements. Makes sense. Awesome. We have another question, and it is, what is the business impact of implementing fairness in ML models at LinkedIn, or the benefits and costs related to the fairness models that you have to implement?
Great question. And I think this is, I would imagine, I think this is one of the first thing that comes to people's mind is like, oh, like what happens when you say that we want to make something fair and then like, oh, it is reducing business impact. To be honest, it's not necessary that that happens. And I don't think most companies are at a place where they're debating between that right now. But there are like we do have philosophies of how we approach certain things. If we feel something is just absolutely wrong, then it gets corrected irrespective of business impact. However, there is another huge line of work which does not think of fairness as a zero sum game. It truly is not. Like sometimes if we are trying to improve and better connect, let's say, Black and Hispanic community with with companies who are looking to hire diverse slate, like I think you're going to grow the pie, and not necessarily slice and cut out from someone else's part of the pie. So I think there are both notions, and you need to be very careful of like which applies where. But like within LinkedIn, we almost take a very strong stance that we believe it is also possible to bring in new features, new initiatives that need not hurt anyone in equity.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about looking at just business metrics, but also like holistically thinking of increasing the pie. That makes a lot of sense. Um, kind of a similar question in that what are you looking forward to in terms of improving fairness? I know that it's Like you can't just like measure it on a chart that you have improved fairness somehow. But what are the initiatives that you are kind of looking forward to in this space?
What are the initial? So, um, from LinkedIn's perspective, I am really so one of the main things that people struggle and companies struggle with is how do we diversify our talent pool, and it's a really difficult problem from many angles. Like if let's say you want to bet, and if you want to better connect the, let's say, the underrepresented population, what is the right interface to actually show them? Because you want to be very careful of could you be accidentally discriminating against the majority group. um, like people are like, even there are studies where even people from underrepresented groups, they do not like to be tagged as underrepresented when someone is hiring. So there's so many like psychological, policy, law based complications here, that as well as this problem is so important to solve. And it's interesting because both the companies and the underrepresented members, they want this, right? So it's a win-win. There is no one who's losing in this, which is great. So I am really looking forward to how we're going to crack this in a way which appeals. Because one thing which is in fairness is uh, it like anything that you do can have so many, like anything can you do can have so many positive and negative implications, that there is no absolute right and wrong. And it comes down to what your intent is and how you're thinking about like how much attention you're paying to unintended consequences. But unfortunately there is no absolute right and wrong, and then anything could be misconstrued as well. So I am looking forward to cracking that.
Amazing answer. I'm so like fascinated hearing about all these future impacts of what you are currently doing in the platform as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. It was a fascinating talk, Sakshi. It was a pleasure having you here in the conference. And I know we didn't get to all the questions, but if the audience would like to connect with you, what's the best way to get in touch? I believe you shared your email and your LinkedIn.
I did share my email, and please feel free to connect to my LinkedIn profile. But let me know if you would like me to post my email on the public chat.
I think it should be present in your speaker bio as well, so our audience can go to your speaker bio at the conference website.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks so much again for that great presentation.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of
Bye.
course. Bye. For audience, please let us know what you thought about that talk. We have posted a poll, and you can see it in the poll tab in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And I will give you a second to vote. Awesome. It's been a pleasure to be your host in the techniques track. This audience has been absolutely superb. Thank you so much for attending this conference. You're all amazing. We are now moving to the closing keynote by Peter Matson from Google. Stay right where you are, and you will be automatically directed there. And I will see you at the main stage.